Hello and welcome to a very breaking news of not news, a very breaking episode of Cinema Savvy News. Obviously, it didn't go ahead on Monday because there was no news. And guess what? Since that, we've had three humongous news pieces. The other two came out at 6 a.m. English time, so there's going to be no live video for them. This is one that's come at a human time. This is, if you haven't guessed by now, breaking news is that Spider-Man is going to be returning to the. I say returning, I say not leaving the MCU. In the last hour, we've had a not statement come out, but the news has broke that Sony and Marvel have agreed a one solo film deal and basically also a second film, which is going to be the team-up film. We still don't know what that is in Phase 4 or 5 yet, but he's here to stay. That's the basic news. There's been a lot of drama over the last, 2 months, would you say, Chris, with this one?
Yeah, I mean, Sony and Disney's quickly becoming the biggest monopoly in the world, and it's slowly terrifying, and they're consuming everything, including Spider-Man. But then this kind of shook the core of, especially people that have been following the MCU and everything like that for the last 10 plus years. Spider-Man is kind of a household name in the films now, especially considering they were setting up to be almost the new Iron Man character, really, like the new face of the MCU, if you will. So when deals fell through, we didn't report on anything because, for one, the news on the channel was still very much in its infancy, and we kind of all knew that this was going to happen and they were going to work it out somehow. It's a no-brainer, really. I mean, the Spider-Man films are making a ridiculous amount of money. The Avengers films are incredibly popular as well. So to keep him in that environment where it's financially lucrative makes a lot of sense for both companies. It would have been really annoying if it had have gone to Sony and we couldn't have finished that story. And to be honest, I don't know what the MCU would have done, how they would have scrambled together and everything like that. But it's nice to finally get this confirmation that Spider-Man is here to stay for at least a little while longer. They actually do have a release date for the next movie. So things are very much moving ahead. I think that was probably always the original plan. To have the third movie come out around that time. It was just unfortunate that, talks and discussions went the way they did. I think it's a smart release date for it, gives it enough time, gives it a bit of a breather. But it's the group movie. It's that team-up movie that I'm really excited about. Whether that's going to be another Avengers film or, what we've discussed, and I guess this was sort of brought to the forefront with Far From Home, talks of multiverses and Spider-Verses and everything like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think if you bring it down to its mechanics, Sony needs Disney, Disney needs Sony. Sony's not going to make that. We know Sony won't make the money they would under Disney. Not to say that Spider films aren't successful, but there's a reason wanting to get $1 billion until this year, and it's because it's in the MCU. It's an easy check for them. They print a check for the funding. They get $1 billion in return. Disney, however, do need them as well because although financially they're well off, they don't need anyone to help for any finances anytime soon. They've spent the last 4 years kind of making Spider-Man their new lead Avenger. Spoiler for Endgame, Iron Man's dead. Far From Home's all about how, Tony chose him, blah, 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 all that kind of jazz. They can't give up this character who they've just spent 4 years bigging up because now, we don't know when the next Avengers film is, but he's by the time the next one, I'm guessing he'll be the most experienced one, maybe. But I'm intrigued because I want a Spider-Verse, not even have to do live action. I'm not the biggest fan of Tom Holland, putting it lightly. It would be, to me, a real waste of potential, especially the fact they brought back J.K. Simmons. To end Far From Home the way they did and not have anything lined up would have been disastrous for both companies. So I reckon it's a smart decision. They haven't announced the percentage. So for those that don't know, the reason they fell out was that, I believe, was it a 50-50 Disney one or was it 70-30?
So there were conflicting stories about it because I know that the original report was that I think Disney wanted 50% or something like that, possibly even higher. But then I know that you did some digging and saw that they only wanted 30% or something like that, I think.
Yeah, and considering, I know this isn't a whole Sony-Disney debate, but I think the big thing to take from these new Spider-Man films is that Disney, all Sony do is fund it and they do the marketing. And Sony is disastrous at marketing. Far From Home is from the worst posters you'll see. What was the other one? Homecoming had the worst Marvel poster of probably the 23 of them. There's a reason you can tell when Sony markets it because you get about 5 trailers as well. Whereas, like I said, Disney, they just do the creative side of it. They can give them the characters to be in the film. They help write it. They make it part of the MCU. They just want. Obviously, I don't think Disney are as fully. I say the more Marvel. I don't think Kevin Feige sits there thinking I need to make money. I think he sits there thinking I want Spider-Man in my films, and I understand both sides of the story. Sony like, oh, we fund it, it's our character being the rights. Yeah, I get that, Marvel, but you don't make any money if it's not for us creating and producing it. So, you know, it's basically just who was going to break first. And
yeah, and I mean with Kevin Feige as well. I mean, when reports came out that it wasn't going to be a thing, he was saying, you know, we knew that we only had like a finite amount of time to have Spider-Man. This was the story we wanted to tell with him. We're very happy. It was, you know, it was PR. It was very safe. It was a very diplomatic, political statement. But to have that ending of Far From Home, you don't make that ending the ending of your Spider-Man journey if you don't plan to do more from him. So that was just kind of a laughable statement to me. But you know, there is a flip side to this as well. In that I did see some people who were genuinely excited and intrigued to see what Sony would do with the rights of Spider-Man again. You know, once they had complete creative control over it. Yes, they have had some, you know, very bad missteps here and there with the Amazing Spider-Man films and everything like that, and the fallout that kind of happened after those. But they also, although it's an animated film, they did kind of helm Into the Spider-Verse, which was fantastic. Arguably, perhaps the best Spider-Man movie, although we'll always have a place in our hearts for the Sam Raimi trilogy, of course. But there was that intrigue there to see, right, now that they've got the rights back, what could they do? Would they just shoehorn him into like a terrible Venom sequel, or would they actually do something above and beyond what we'd expect?
That's my worry. They want him in Venom, don't they? Sony, you know, if there's a report coming out that they want to make a Madame Web film, if anyone's heard of Madame Web or seen the original like 90s animated Spider-Man, you're going to sit there thinking this is as weird as the Aunt May film they once planned. Sony's a weird one because it's not just Spider-Man that they've struggled with. Kind of everything over the last. Christ, I can't even. I mean, someone will no doubt know the answers, but Sony aren't not even on Disney's level. They're not on Fox's level. They're not on Warner Brothers, Universal, Lionsgate. Sony are really down in the dirt, and their whole sort of film, I guess, not obviously like tellies and games and whatnot, but their whole sort of franchise, I guess, in films now is all on Spider-Man. And you know, Disney could have bought them out, but I'm guessing any negotiation Disney will go in for the rest of their lives, they'll say we bought Star Wars for $4 billion. Yours is not worth that. That's what I'm guessing. I could sit there Sony be like, we want 10 billion, and it'd be like that scene at Norbit when he gets like the paper out of his ass and gets the fucking spear out. That's how I imagine sort of Sony being in their deals. I'm happy this has happened. It needed to happen. It was going to happen. That's the big thing. Like when all this stuff, I mean, it was great for the memes. There's a lot of good things online, but ultimately this was always going to happen. It would be too confusing for both parties. Sony can't do a standalone Spider-Man film, and everyone just forget that a lot of these people that see are kids. Like we were kids when we saw the Raimi trilogy, and if you're used to that, not just the MCU, but this Spider-Man, what are you going to do in the next film? And like, why haven't they mentioned the Avengers? Like, a 4-year-old kid goes to his dad. The dad just sits there like, wow. Do you know about contracts at your age? No, you don't. I mean, when I was, there wasn't really dramas like this when we were younger, I guess. Too young to know film.
I think it's a very different movie environment now from when we were kids. I mean, I'm sure there was, you know, studio interference, meddling, you know, contractual rights and everything like that. It's nothing new in the movie world, but I guess now with the internet and everything like this, we are kind of made more publicly aware of it. Before, you might have only had movie magazines or something like that, or unless you were in the know, maybe some behind the scenes on some films would have gone into that. But I think it's kind of a recent thing, at least in this terms of this kind of publicity that we're getting from it.
Yeah. And I think that's why, like what we mentioned, the publicity as well, that's become a big thing of this. You know, this kind of stuff might have happened a dozen times over the last days. I mean, could you imagine Empire Strikes Back in 1980? Could you imagine the speculation for, like, in modern day social media of is Harrison Ford coming back? Because that you'd have had that for like what, a year and a half until that's the casting. And you know, it does make you wonder that in this modern day that, you know, this is a 2-month dispute, 2 months, 3 months, and you know, you think it'd been longer. And obviously Sony's history goes back a lot longer than 3 months messing around with characters. But you know, even today, one sort of minor film dispute gets more traction than they did 5 years ago. And when Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out, everyone's like, "This is rubbish. Please reboot. Please go to Marvel." There wasn't the intensity I think you have now. I think, not using Nash as an example, but the online community, it's far more open now. I think with the sort of Twitter progressing, I think it's the big one now more so than anything, especially for film news. I think the media landscape's in a different world, and at the end of the day, they were both negotiating. The rumor was that Sony leaked that they weren't going to renew, and it's just caused a storm. And it was obviously the week before D23, which definitely did not help Disney's favor too. So it's all tied up in a neat bun. Me personally, I'm fine with it. They need to carry on the story. I'm invested in it now, and at the end of the day, I don't want Disney any of the rights. So I love them having the film rights, but Sony, they've got the Spider-Man game. They've got the animated stuff that they're doing. As long as they don't milk it too much, which is my main worry, I think it's all going to work out fine. If Kevin Feige is in control, especially Marvel, continuity-wise, bar the whole Spider-Man Homecoming 8 years later thing, it's pretty much fine. And now I guess the other thing is probably more appealing for them to get actors if he is in the MCU too.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from this is nice to finally have that reassurance that yes, he is here to stay. We guessed it was going to happen, but it's nice to finally get that in the written word and confirmed. Whilst I haven't been the biggest fan of the Spider-Man movies that the MCU has put out, it would be weird and it would be a noticeable absence in their grander story that they're wanting to tell, and they are wanting to continue this. The MCU is continuing at least until 2021. We know that. But there would have been a huge Spider-Man shaped hole if he had have exited out of the MCU, and that would have thrown a massive spanner in the works, I'm sure, for all of their future plans that they had for all of their movies. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on it, really.
Same here. So as I said, this was breaking news. This was a quicker video. We've done a couple of these before. If you want to find us on social media, we've got facebook.com/cinemasavvy. We have on Twitter @cinema_savvy and on Instagram @cinema_savvy. Find us on there. We'll be announcing our new shows. Battle of the Brackets, at this point, we do not think is going ahead tomorrow. We have tried to get 5 people in. It's very hard to get it together. Our next thing, I believe, may be a Rambo review, which will be me jumping on with you. I've not yet seen it. And then we have the news returning on Monday because there's actually some news. For those that don't know, there's some Jurassic Park news and some Star Wars Marvel news. So This has been the breaking news. We'll be back with Rambo, I think, this weekend. And until then, as I said, follow us on social medias, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Ring the bell, as Tate always says. But thank you for watching, I think.